Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert from Five. That was one of the episodes from behind the scenes of Circularity, produced by Waterbear and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And we're going to send you a link after this event where you'll be able to watch the other episodes from that series for free online as well. Stephen Bethel, who's featured in that film, he has his own vintage clothing business, Bank and Vogue, and he also works with other companies trying to make fashion circular. And we saw him talking in the film about not just reusing clothes, but also recycling stuff, cutting up old garments, making them into new things, also breaking down the fibers that are in the textiles so that you can make whole new textiles as well. So really all the different bits, or a lot of the different bits that we're trying to put together into this kind of never-ending circle that we're trying to build. And Stephen Bethel says in the film, if we can start inspiring the conversation about things having another life, that's the moment where people will stop throwing things in the landfill. And on that point, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that in the time it took us to watch that film, 1,076 tons of clothing around the world was burned or went to landfill. And if you're trying to picture how much that is, it's 50 shipping containers worth of clothes have been chucked in the time it took us to watch that film. The good news is that there's a world out there of innovative people who are trying to tackle this and turn things around, and that's why we're delighted to have 5 of them here with us on our panel today. Panel, if you could come up and take the stage, please. Thank you. So we're going to hear from our panel, and you guys will get the chance to ask them some questions a little bit later on as well. And then after that, we're going to invite you to go with the panelists into some group discussions so that you can meet each other, learn from each other, and learn from the panelists too. But before we go further, I'm going to introduce these guys who we're so lucky to have here with us today. First of all, on the left here, Lili Dreyer, who since 2019 is the founder and CEO of Wear, which is an upcycled footwear business based here in Copenhagen. So they're taking old jeans, old workwear, old tablecloths, and turning them into what Lili has on her feet right here. Welcome, Lili. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Frederik Larsen, one of the founders of futurum, a strategic consultancy which, among other things, worked on the sustainability requirements for Copenhagen Fashion Week, which they introduced very successfully in 2020, and then which then went on to inform the Fremtidens Tekstilkrav program, which was a program backed by the Danish government to look at how fashion businesses could improve their sustainability, and has also consulted with a long list of businesses from Denmark and beyond on how to become more sustainable and more responsible. Welcome, Frederik. In the middle over here, we have Katrine Lee Larsen, who you may recognize if you're a watcher of the TV show Løvens Hule, where she appeared a couple of years ago and got a big investment for her business, Copenhagen Cartel, which makes swimwear and sportswear out of lost fishing nets. And you may not know this, but a lot of fishing nets get lost and abandoned in the ocean. They end up sticking to reefs and wrecks in the water. It's a nightmare for fish and for turtles, very harmful to marine life. So volunteer divers get them off again, give them to companies that can recycle the textiles from the nets, and then companies like Copenhagen Cartel turn them into cool new stuff, and in the process, hopefully spread the word about what's happening in the oceans. Welcome, Katrine.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kristian Keller from Fashion Revolution Denmark, which is an organization doing what the name says, trying to kick off a revolution in fashion. They're the guys behind campaigns like Who Made My Clothes? Is it Who Made My Clothes? That's right, and Good Clothes, Fair Pay. So focusing on not just the sustainability side, but also the people side, workers' rights and workers' conditions in fashion as well. Kristian is a journalist who's written about music and culture, and then got interested in the state of the fashion industry and now looks after policy for Fashion Revolution Denmark. And finally, over on the right-hand side there, Maria Clemmensen from Sharedrobes. Now, Sharedrobes is a company using technology to look at the not how clothes are made, but at us, how we use them, and trying to make it just as normal to share clothes as it is right now to buy them. And you can download the Sharedrobes app right now, upload your wardrobe, look at other people's wardrobes, it's great fun, and start sharing stuff. Thank you for joining us today, Maria. So to begin with, I would like to ask each of our panel members one by one to just tell me in one sentence a little bit about what your concerns and goals and focus are right now when it comes to circular fashion. What are you working on right now? You first, Lili.
In just one sentence.
Yes, please.
So
Just
for
don't
us,
breathe.
just like scalable textile upcycling.
Scalable textile upcycling.
Yeah. So actually, I think it works quite well with what he said, kind of like upcycling textiles, but doing it at scale, so we really can make it a solution for as many textiles as possible.
Great. Frederik?
Yeah, I'll try to make it as short at least. So I would say maybe a just but very flat circularity. And we can get back to that.
Flat circularity. Yeah. This is getting complicated already. We'll come back to that. Okay. Katrine?
Yeah, so we are working on traceability. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of different components in our supply chain. So we are trying to gather that and make it more traceable, transparent through technology.
Great. Kristian?
Yeah, we're working right now mostly with the social aspect of it, and through the campaign you just talked about, Good Clothes, Fair Pay, trying to make sure that companies are held accountable for paying living wages to their workers.
Thank you. And you, Maria?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say that what we are trying to do is to make fashion more circular. Our number one goal is that more fashion gets or finds new homes. So that was that one sentence. I have more to say, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. My next question is going to be to you, first of all, Frederik. I want to ask what maybe is a slightly cheeky question, which is, does the circular economy exist? Or is it something that we just hope will exist in the future?
The latter. I think a lot of people wish it would exist, and I think we are trying to create a very beautiful system. The circular economy is intuitive. It looks good. You can sort of imagine it, and you can see how things just continuously go around this circle. That has never happened, and it will never happen. And I think that's a huge issue that we need to address, also with new legislation within circularity, EU level and local levels, and saying, this is a fiction. It's a beautiful fiction, and it's a great model to work with, but it's never in itself going to be a reality. We will need so many different localized versions. We need to scale down production generally. We need to think about how to flatten out, and here it is, the flatter circular economy. The fact that it's not about how quickly stuff can turn the circle. It's about how long it stays in people's lives, in their closets, in their wardrobes, and that's really the ambition. We shouldn't be able to see the beginning and the end of a product. It should be a whole lifespan that's very flat. And beyond that is, of course, the ambition that I think is very important, that we take much better care of the resources. And using a circular economy model to think through that is a good idea.
Okay, so it's something that we should never expect to be perfect, then? Okay.
All systems are leaky. That's a very sort of profound. When we think about these systems, there's always leakages. There's always places where things don't really go the way we wanted it to go. And that's okay if we don't make systems that have to be perfect and where everything only works, it all circulates in a perfectly mannered way.
There's a great term that came actually from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who co-produced that film, which was circular-ish, which was their way of trying to describe, I think, what you're saying as well. Do you guys also feel like what you're doing is circular-ish rather than ever truly circular, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think that everyone is kind of part of the solution, so no one is the actual solution. And I think that's also very important, because I also talk with a lot of different people who many times thinks that I am the answer to everything, and I am not at all. But I am trying to do my part and trying to solve this little piece of a bigger puzzle, and I think that is also an important aspect when we talk about it, that everyone, even consumers, brands, everyone kind of plays a role in this, and no one alone will ever be the solution, but collectively we can kind of try and get further.
Yeah.
Okay. Kristian, did you want to come in there? as well?
Yeah, I was just sort of, I like Frederik starting off that way, because I think it's a very important point, because right now, a lot of companies in the fashion industry are trying to sell this idea about circularity being the end goal, or even very close to being there already. So when you go down and take your old textile to H&M, and you get a coupon to buy some new stuff, by the way, then you sort of feel like, okay, it's fine, I can go out and buy some new stuff because it's circular, they're using this to make something else. And that's the most dangerous part right now, I think, about talking about, not sustainability, well, sustainability too, but circularity, is that it doesn't need to overshadow the real problem at hand, which is overproduction, overuse, or not enough use and whatever. So, yeah, it's a great way to start and end this conversation, I think.
So, Kristian, that kind of greenwashing that you talk about, businesses trying to present themselves as more sustainable than they really are, is that a big problem for you guys? Is that a big concern?
Oh, definitely. A big part of what Fashion Revolution does too is fight for, transparency, trying to make the fashion industry transparent, which is, you can't really have sustainability or circularity without transparency, because you need to be able to, of course, look at if what they're claiming is actually true. And so right now, we still don't know where a lot of factories or companies make their clothing, under what kind of circumstances, and we don't really know what H&M does when they collect clothes from consumers. So that sort of transparency needs to happen to
How do you get that?
anywhere. How do you get that? Yeah.
Complicated.
It's complicated. No, I mean, in anything, I think, through legislation. I mean, you have to force people. But yeah, what Fashion Revolution is doing, the way we make our transparency index is only seeing what's available out there to anybody. So what does H&M write about in their own channels about transparency? And that's how so that's why H&M score real big on the Fashion Revolution's transparency index every year, because they actually talk a lot about what they do. But again, you can't really follow up on a lot of it. But yeah, so I think talking about it more, and then I think, at the end goal, it has to be through legislation.
Okay. Do you agree, Lili?
Yes, I agree that it has to come from many different places, legislation being one of the central parts. Yeah. I also think that in terms of transparency and greenwashing, which we talked a little bit about, I think it's also important that when we then do make legislation about it, that we also realize that companies are different, and some companies have a lot of resources to go in and do LCAs and do all of these different things that are required to do,
What's an LCA?
Life cycle assessment. So kind of right now, at least in Denmark, it's required for you to be able to call yourself sustainable or to call yourself something in regards to that you have a third-party verified LCA. And that for some companies is a very little easy thing to do, and for some companies it can cost a lot of money and might not actually be possible. So I think it's also important when we do that we then think, okay, so how can we also help companies to be better at becoming transparent, because it's complicated, as Katrine also said.
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead.
Because I think what Kristian says is so important, and that transparency is a big part of it. The global fashion industry and most companies work within a global system when it comes to fashion, because production is so sort of spread out. The beginning of a lot of product lives is very murky. So where are the producers, the suppliers? They have sub-suppliers that often have a lot of the work done in people's homes, because a lot of it is handwork that women do at home and produce it for their factories that go into bigger systems. And that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's very difficult to trace who does what and where do they do it. And some of it is between private sort of homes and public or sort of work workspaces, that is really difficult. And then at the very end as well, like you said, we don't know what happens with the clothing that is collected. We know very little about textile waste. In fact, I mean, we know some, and we've seen part of it, but it's still a huge area that hasn't been explored. So we also don't know where it ends up. So it's all sort of an open system, and circularity can't really deal with that because we have to have that overview and the data.
Thank you. Maria, a question to you. Your business is really looking at, you're not involved in making garments at all. You're looking at trying to change consumer behavior, trying to change what people do and make people share. So you're using technology to do that. You've got your app, you've got the services that you provide. How do you go about approaching the sort of problem of trying to change behavior? What are the sort of tools and techniques that you use to try and get people to do stuff differently with their clothes?
I would say that the hard part about what I am doing is very much about the behavior. Changing behavior is super difficult. Also in terms of what you said, Frederik, about the best thing is that if people buy something, they have it throughout its whole life cycle and just keep it. But what we see is that unfortunately people use their clothing up to 3 times, or it's mostly women who do that, and it's 70% is nearly unused. So that's kind of the dilemma or the challenge that we are trying to solve, and we have done so in many different ways and saying, okay, this does not help anything. So we kind of try to do that through technology, yes, but also now we're kind of in this transitioning period where we're also gonna do some of the activities in-house, because what we see is it's very difficult for people to kind of see the purpose in spending a lot of time of uploading photos and sharing directly through technology. We see that people are attracted again to the physical space in trading, which is super interesting. But also now we see that in order to make a change, we need to share clothing more, but also because if it just hangs in your closet and is collecting dust for a long time, then the chance that it ever gets a second life becomes longer, the longer time it hangs in the closet. So that's where we kind of try to make people think about what is actually hanging in there, and also have a feature where they can actually see what they have in their wardrobes and so forth. So we try to do a lot to see what actually works in terms of helping fashion becoming, at least more circular. It can never become fully circular, but
circular-ish.
Circular-ish,
That's a new word.
Frederik, I think I need to bring you back in here, because for your PhD, you spent 6 months working in a thrift store in San Francisco and looking at how they price stuff, right? How they decide the prices of things. What did you learn there? It's a whole PhD, of course.
It's a whole PhD.
For the people who don't have time to read it, what did you learn about how we put value on used stuff?
I learned a lot of things, and it was very fascinating. And just to context, I actually did smaller studies in different parts of the world as well to try to follow things around and see what happened with them. But the focus of it was the valuation, like you said. How do we transform something that is considered waste by somebody who gets rid of it, or at least it's something we have disposed of from our homes and from our wardrobes. And then it has to be turned into something that is marketable. And that practice was what I was studying. Sort of how do you assess stuff? And it was a lot of different stuff, clothing, but also other types of products. What kind of mechanisms go into that assessment? And it's in this context, it was all done by hand, which predominantly it still is, because you have this issue with an industry that produces a sort of serially, sort of industrial production with many similar items, and that's what makes selling and marketing products easier. When you get to a second-hand market, you have one cup and you have one pair of trousers. You don't have different sizes. You don't have anything else. Everything has to be assessed individually, and that's very labor-intensive, and it's very difficult work. It's also very dirty work. That's another thing I learned. I think probably need to narrow it down because there's so many learnings. But in terms of the valuation, I think there are a lot of things at play, and that's also one of the reasons I think this circular economy is so exciting when we look at the human aspect, the individual aspect, like you were saying, sort of what do people do with their clothing? That's so important because it's an individual choice with each thing when it comes to secondhand trading, and that makes it difficult but also incredibly exciting.
I have a question for Lili and Katrine. You are the guys on the panel who are making upcycled fashion items, sneakers in your case, and swimwear and sportswear in your case, Katrine. What happens to your products when somebody's finished with them?
Should I start?
Yeah.
I start. Okay, so what happens with ours is that actually like what we wanted to do in the beginning was that we wanted to be able to take the sole apart from the upper part so we could kind of recirculate them in individual streams. We found out that wasn't quite possible yet, so what we do now is that we work with our sole manufacturer that can then take the whole shoe back and then make that into new soles that we can then use in our new sneakers. We haven't gotten there yet since we haven't received enough sneakers back, but when we get there, we have the whole chain ready to go.
Okay, so does that mean effectively that you can recycle the sole part, but you can't recycle
the whole part? So they actually shred the whole part, so both the upper part and the
and
sole.
it all becomes part of the new sole?
Yeah,
okay.
and that's when you design it, you have to think about that. So we can't add, for example, like metal parts, for the eyelets, for the laces, or any hard plastic parts or anything. But yeah, when you design it right, then that is possible.
Okay, and let's say, you say you haven't reached this stage yet because you need to get enough back, but let's say you get 100 pairs of sneakers back. How many new ones how many new soles can you make out of that?
We actually haven't tested that, but it will be a part of the input material, so it won't be like that this, sneaker will become only sole. For that sole, there will have to be added some virgin material, and I think that's a very good explanation as to a part of why it can only be circular-ish, because every time it circulates, at least most of the time, it will lose a little bit of value. It will so it's kind of like that, but we don't know how many soles there will be per sneaker yet.
You'll find out one day.
We'll find out, and that will be very interesting.
Let me just go ahead,
just
Kristian.
quickly. Yeah. It's funny because that's part of when H&M sells recycled T-shirts or whatever. I think you could call it something recycled or made from recycled material if it's 1 or 2% of the actual shirt that's recycled material. Just saying. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big difference between has recycled materials in it and it's made completely from recycled
the loop
materials.
doesn't really feel
and then there's the question of can it be recycled, which then, Katrine, what happens to your stuff when
our issue is a little bit the same as Lili. Like, we haven't been in business for that long to really see products coming back in that sense. But what we did last year was a kind of like a little quick fix, I would call it. So we had what was equivalent of an IKEA bag of like, what you call that? Refunds and dead stock and samples. And then we teamed up with the 2 student girls, and they upcycled this material into scrunchies, pouches, like all kinds of new products again. And that actually ended up with us only having what's equivalent of a pair of joggers left, and that was kind of why the stuff has been returned. We're going to had to cut that away. But that was kind of like a short-term solution. But in a long term, we are now working together with another Danish brand and the Teknologisk Institute to try and find a way to kind of separate. Right now, our products are recycled nylon and elastan. So it's around 80% recycled nylon, 20% elastan. And the big thing is to separate that. So we actually came a long way, but I also think that is one of the, I would say, issues with circularity is a lot of these solutions. There are so many solutions out there. We are very much part of many science projects in it, but it just takes a lot of time. So we are not there yet, but we are kind of working on it. But this solution we've been working on with Teknologisk Institute we've been working on for over a year. So it's like, it's not because we're not doing anything, but it just takes time. And then next step is now we actually found a way to separate these things, but can we make a factory? We're still a startup, so how do we create a factory? We have the solution. So there's a lot of kind of question marks in the kind of industry still, but I think the main thing, and I also think that consumers, medias and stuff like that needs to take into consideration that Rome was not built in a day. I think the most important thing is that a brand takes some responsibility and actively work on solutions, but we are a small startup. Yeah, we had some funding, but we are still like not paying founders' salary. So you kind of also need to take a step back in saying, okay, we need to, of course, be part of the solutions, but it's also a realistic mindset of what can we do? Like, I would love if an investor came to me tomorrow and said, I will build a factory here in Copenhagen and we can implement the solution. I would be like the happiest person in the world.
Maybe they're in the audience.
I think
If there's anyone out there, I am ready to do it.
But
So, you know, there are some challenges in that, but we are trying, just working on both short-term and long-term solutions in that.
I think in the film he briefly mentioned RenewCell, which is one of the new technologies trying to do this. And I was involved in the research project 10 years ago that was developing the technology that RenewCell is now using also. That was 10 years ago, and they've managed to create a small market for, and I think it's booming. It's going to be amazing, but it's 10 years ago this development. So you're absolutely right, and the funding that has gone into developing these technologies over the last 10 years is insane. Meanwhile, a lot of companies have been holding this up, saying it exists. We can do this for 10 years. You know, so it's not implemented. It's something that is the beacon in a way. But before we actually implement it in the industries, people continues to use more and more products. We are producing, if not more and more, right now it's stabilized, but more than 100 billion, it's estimated, items a year in the global fashion industry.
So you feel like the talk
insane.
about stuff like RenewCell is not in proportion to
Exactly
what's happening?
Yes, the proportions.
It's
because
like less than
the technology is
1%,
amazing,
I believe, of textiles that get recycled or...
Yeah.
Like they make it sound like, you know, all the textiles that cannot be reused or upcycled, they just go to RenewCell and they make it into new textiles. But that is not the truth at all. No. They can't. Like, and I think that's a big problem with circularity as well, is that what we have to work with as someone who tries to recirculate textiles is we have some textiles that have already been produced and we kind of have to work with them, and they're a mix of all sorts of different, you know, like materials, and they are not often made to actually be recirculated. So we kind of have to find solutions to that and also kind of figure out how we can make new production fit to kind of the solutions that we have.
So actually a huge part of the picture is what Shared Ropes is trying to help.
Yes, but also because in the beginning we actually worked with brands, and what we also saw is that when you are a brand focusing on being more sustainable, it's more pricey, of course, to produce these products. So the difficulty is that consumers are highly price sensitive. And that's actually why we changed our business model into what we're doing today, to kind of, we have this principle, use clothing as currency when you trade clothing, so you free up space in your budget to pay for more conscious fashion than you usually do. Because consumers usually say that, yeah, we were trying to be more sustainable, but actually it's on the third or fourth principle that they base their consumer behavior based on, and price is on the first, even though they want to be more sustainable. So that's also a difficulty, that there's so many brands out there trying to do good, and then we just need the consumers to also go that direction, right? So yeah, that's also a part of the issue, to they pay more for products.
Yeah. This is something that I've heard you speak about before, Katrina, as well, is making people understand the true cost of stuff, and that we've sort of taught people deliberately or accidentally that clothes are cheap, and they shouldn't be.
No, they shouldn't be. No.
Very deliberately, I think.
Yeah.
You guys must have to think about cost a lot.
We meet it all the time. Like I was out speaking at a school, And I understand when you're a student, you don't have much money, and like the only questions kind of we got back was like, why are your products so expensive? And I was like, we actually earn less on our products on margins than I think a lot of the fast fashion companies do, because when you are a sustainable company or trying to be a sustainable company, you also have more responsibility on your shoulders. So when you go out and claim stuff, you have to back it up, which means you have to pay a lot of money for LCAs, for consultancy. I also got Frederik to consult me in how to be more sustainable. So you have to spend a lot of money in actually proving that you're trying to do something better. All these costs you have to add onto the product. And being certified, having transparency in your supply chain. Like right now, we're working with one of the companies, a Norwegian company, supplying fishing nets into the Italian production that we're working with. We have their full open supply chain from sea to shelf almost. And I just want to be able to showcase this data and this transparency to consumers. The last offer I got from a tech company to try and do it was about 500,000 kroner to build a platform for it. We don't have that money to do it. And where are the money coming from? So my point is just when you want to be a circular brand, there are just a lot of elements that goes into it that you're not responsible of doing if you're a fast fashion company, which means the price of your end product, landed cost of your product, will be higher. And that is something I think there's a big gap in education in consumers, that is not because we are claiming sustainability and then we think, we can take a higher price. Not at all. I wish I could actually make a product that everyone could afford, but it's the amount of effort going into that single product. It is just very expensive.
Okay, a last question to all of you before we open things up to the audience. There's a book that we have here, produced by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's called Circular Design for Fashion, which they published a couple of years ago. And there's a nice quote in that book from the creative director of Italian Vogue, he's called Ferdinando Verderi, and he says, "We're an industry of desire. We create desire, we value desire, we live by desire. We know how to use it. We now have the responsibility to put our talent to service for the greater good, directing desire towards something we all need, a better world." I thought that was quite an interesting quote because, we're talking here and we're sort of saying, the fashion industry needs to change, things have got to change, but it's not like we hate fashion. We're all pro-fashion, right? And we all appreciate the... No? Oh, okay.
Pro-clothing, maybe, but not
nice.
fashion.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think we all appreciate the joy and the creativity and the expression and everything that fashion brings into the world. So how do we keep that? How do we not lose that as we reinvent the fashion industry or the clothing industry? Maybe you go first, Frederik.
Well, and it's not completely true, but I think it's important. There's a fashion industry and there's a fashion system, which is a system of constant change, and then there is style and clothing and beautiful products, and those are not necessarily the same thing at all. That doesn't mean that fashion doesn't also create something really exciting and interesting. I think the problem is still that fashion is an exclusive and excluding concept. It was developed in Paris. It's a very white, it's a very European, it's a very elitist concept of people being able to afford new products all the time. That in itself is not, in my opinion, desirable. What's desirable is style and individuality and creativity and beautiful products and good crafts and all of that. And we can have all of that without a sort of fashion system.
Well, Kristian, you're someone who's campaigning to get the fashion industry to change, and your background has been in writing about culture. So I guess with a love of this and with an enthusiasm for it. But what led you to do what you do now?
Well, I think Frederik's right, really. I mean, I think creativity and great design is fantastic, but I think what's happened more and more with fast fashion and with the pace we're on, if you have to design 16 collections, are they going to be very good? probably not as good if you had to make 2 collections. So I think as far as creativity and great design, it's diminished over the last 20, 30 years. So I think scaling back and doing less will only make creativity, whatever you say in English, I can't find the word.
Blossom.
Blossom. Something, yeah. So I think definitely, I mean, yeah, creativity is fantastic, and fashion is great, and I desire a lot of it, but I desire it mostly because it's being pushed in my face constantly.
Thank you. Okay. Does anybody from the audience have a question that we can put to our panel? Yes, up at the back there. The mic is just coming to you. If you can tell us your name as well when you ask your question, please.
Hi, my name is Indra. Thank you very much for an interesting movie and a very valuable discussion. I myself have a question about the materials. You have been focusing a lot about existing materials and putting it back into the circle. What about breaking out of the traditional raw materials and pushing the standard into using the biodegradable materials or some food waste as alternative materials, which could potentially biodegrade on a quicker lifespan, so to say?
Yeah, I can start with that one. I think that is also a good solution. I don't think using textiles that already exist is kind of excluding other solutions. I think we need to, as in everything else, we need to work on so many different ways into creating a better, not fashion, but better clothing and better kind of things that we wear. So I think that should definitely also happen. I think for our case, you can almost call it laziness, but it is just very nice to have textiles that are already made, and all you have to do is actually just cut a big piece from the jeans, and then you can use that directly in the shoes. So that for us has been a nice way to start, and we don't have to do a lot of innovation around kind of making a whole new material from food or from something else.
Yeah, so I think just to continue on that one, I think it's kind of the same with the whole circularity systems and recycling systems, that there are a lot of exciting material science going on. We are also part of it. We actually, compared to the size of our company, spend a lot of resources and money on R&D. If you ask my investors, I do not, but we do. Because I also think this is part of the solution. But in my opinion, again, there's a lot of players in this field. A lot of them have come up with something very great, but it's just still not scalable. So that is the issue, and that is also, for example, one of the reasons our products are expensive. We are using a fiber made out of seaweed called sisal. It is humongously more expensive than cotton. So again, it's a really nice, I was just about to swear, sorry. It was a really nice fiber, really nice material, and great alternative to cotton. But the price is 10 times higher, and then no consumers wants to buy it. So it's again this, when is a material mature enough to actually go out to be mainstream? It takes 10 years, maybe. Also, again, how can we as a small company and a startup actually join in on this? There's a long-term and a short-term solution. Short-term is to recycle what we already have. Long-term is to kind of invest into this material science. So I think it's simultaneously, but the material science is just a very long road to go down.
I think it's really important, and I think there's a lot of great work going into trying to find new alternatives. The thing is that what we're trying to find alternatives to is mostly the kind of materials that we've introduced over the last 50 or 60 years, which are the petrochemically based ones, so nylons and polyester and so on. Most of the original fibers used throughout the world are biodegradable, whether it's wool or it's cotton or it's hemp or it's flax or it's kapok or whatever it might be, it's all biodegradable. So what we're trying now to find is to find a solution for making the similar products as we're doing now, instead of thinking, maybe we have the materials, maybe we need to think about how cheaply do we have to produce the products, how many do we need to produce, and so on. And this is not to say that there isn't also huge issues with the cotton industry and so on, but without getting into that, just thinking, why do we need new materials, for example?
Thank you. Another question down here at the front. Thank you. Here's the mic.
I'm also so close. All of you have kept saying that everybody has a role to play in this transition, also companies and consumers and policies. So maybe a question to all of you that I think everybody can answer in their different way. But what is the policy or the law that would help what you and you are doing? If you could decide now or ask policymakers to do something that helps you.
If you were the Prime Minister, Lili.
Yes, that would be cool. Yeah, I think a CO2 tax. Like I think like that companies pay for their negative externalities, like that they pay for the damage that they do. I think that because we talk so much about price and it's such an issue, but if all the companies that does a lot of bad, if they pay for kind of like rectifying that, then like it would be a more fair playing field, and I think that's necessary. So that was the law I would make.
And so that would have a big impact, obviously,
I
well
would vote
beyond
for
the fashion industry as well.
I would vote new career.
And in fashion, it's not just carbon emissions, is it? It's also water and land use.
Yeah, and that would be calculated into the CO2 equivalent footprint, if you can say it like that. So that's
Cool.
also, there's a lot of work. We can't just go out and say, okay, we're going to make that legislation, because it's such a complicated calculation. But I think if we go towards that route, I think that could make a big change.
Okay, I think we should all answer this question. So, Frederik, what about you?
Yes. I would have to sort of frame it with saying that doesn't exist, and I'm sure you also know that we don't have one solution. I think that's a very important part of it. Having said that, I will follow in your footsteps in saying making products way more expensive, I think is the one sort of key to changing a lot of this.
Doesn't sound like a vote-winning policy to me.
No, it doesn't. if you're looking at it from a very specific point of view, if you think about companies, there are plenty of examples of companies who can make a much better profit on very expensive products, for example. So that's one thing from a business perspective. I think the other part is to trying to raise the sort of the pay levels in the fashion industry, which is hugely important. And there's no other way of doing it than making products more expensive. The money has to come from somewhere. So that's another way around it. The other way is that it makes sort of consumer research, and it suggests at least that if we pay more for a product, we take better care of it. So we have it for longer. We resell it instead of throwing it away and so on. So it's also a consumer issue. If it has a higher value from the beginning, the second-hand markets are doing much better. They can actually resell the product much better. And so the direction before it ends up as textile waste is so much longer. Here's the flat circularity again. Like if we can make those 2 points very far from each other, and more sort of economic value in the product is the key to changing that.
Thank you. Katrine.
I don't know if you're allowed to.
I think theoretically this makes a lot of sense, but just a reflection in a world where beauty is already a currency and aesthetics is a currency, that's kind of elitist if you think about it, that raising the price so much excludes a cohort of people from that.
Let's come back.
Yes,
let's come back to that later on.
I would love to comment on that, but I see your point for sure. Yes.
Yes,
Katrine, your turn.
I would definitely vote for Lili as Prime Minister, because I agree. Like again, also as Frederik says, you can't. It's unrealistic to kind of say one thing, but for me, it's definitely also the carbon tax, because. What we see now is definitely that we are just behind on everything because we pay so much more. We almost, I would say, get punished to try and do something that is better. We get punished by consumers because they don't want to pay for the products. We get punished by media because they want us to show transparency and certifications, all these things. And I think it's an unfair battlefield, because why are people not going after the people who are actually polluting, the big players, and you can kind of squeeze them into a box of almost 10 brands, which are really doing bad for the environment. So I think that if there's an incentive to do better, even the people who doesn't really believe it in their hearts, they will of course do it because it's all about profit when you create a business. So I think making a financial incentive by maybe adding a CO2 tax or whatever would definitely force people to go more in that direction.
Kristian?
Yeah, I think I'm covered with what's been said, but as far as the elitism, I think it's an interesting comment, because I have interviewed H&M representatives a couple of times, and they keep referring to that their fashion model is about being democratic. Fashion is for everybody. Clothes should be for everybody. It's sort of saying that if you raise the price, it won't be for everybody. But the fact is that in some countries, of course, but I think the countries that are the main problem, are the countries like our country, which we buy way too much clothing. So if you say, well, I don't want to pay $2,000 for a pair of jeans, well, now you probably buy 5 pairs a year. So you take that and you buy 1 pair a year, and there's your 2,000. So it definitely has to be more expensive. The fact that we think that a t-shirt can cost 50 to 100 kroner, that's what's insane, really. Not the fact that we're questioning if it's democratic that it should be 500.
It's a hard thing.
Somebody's paying the price. We are not, but somebody's paying the price. The planet, the people making it, and H&M's banking it, and whatever.
It's a hard thing to tell people to do, though, isn't it? If you're a politician,
we have to unlearn. I mean, we have to unlearn, and that's. I mean, I don't even know how we're going to do it because it's insane. But I think once you make it impossible to have a business where you can make money selling a T-shirt for 50 kroner, that's what's insane. So if you can make it so that's not even an option, so the 50 kroner option isn't there anymore, then, I think it's going to start happening.
Let's let Maria chip in as well. Sorry. Thank you, Kristian.
Yeah, I totally agree with everyone here, and I don't know if it would be possible to make any legislation on the consumer side, but that side is also super important, apart from, putting CO2 tax on the companies. But it could also be interesting, but I don't know how that would work. But if the consumers also were held accountable for their own footprint in their daily use or spent within fashion.
So everyone's in favor of a CO2 tax. It looks like you got elected, Lili. But how many people in the room are in favor of a CO2 tax? Quickly. Yeah,
Lili for president.
Not surprisingly. Let's do one more question quickly before we break up into groups. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Alex. I was wondering about a couple of things. First, you all mentioned some kind of technological solutions that are embedded in your businesses or business models. So I was wondering, are you witnessing a phenomenon by which these technological solutions are becoming more and more streamlined and more accessible for businesses? Are you receiving any kind of support to implement, for example, LCA or other types of technologies? Or are they still just for businesses that can afford them and they have to bear this burden kind of to make the right decision? And the second question would be, I'm curious to know whether there is a certain target, a certain profile of the customer that you are talking to with your businesses. Is there a part of the market that is more sensitive in your experience to the solutions that you are proposing? And thank you again for your contributions. It was really interesting listening to you.
Who wants to take the first one of those about the technology solutions that?
I would say for our sake, we actually tried through a scholarship, because that's also what we are dependent on. We tried to do an LCA, but we actually got told from DVS, what are they called? The transportation company.
Yes.
DVS, who are one of the only ones who are actually doing like a official audit for the LCA, that we were too small. So we couldn't even do it. So what we had to do, we found another company in Amsterdam who did more like a generic one, but now they actually we put a lot of input into their audit, and then they did it on like a couple of our products specifically. But that was kind of the level we could do, being in business for 2 years. So there's also part that is not only financial, but also what is even possible. But on the financial side, it has to be a prioritization within our budget, saying, okay, then we don't do team building outside of the office this year, because then we have to prioritize the LCA, because no one is contributing for paying it. We are implementing some technology, and the reason why we're able to do it is because we did a big partnership with SAP, software company. I sold my soul a little bit, so I'm doing like 5 presentations, internal presentations for them. We are doing a lot of stuff that also helps them, but that is the only way to get our hands into technology that would cost us 200,000 to actually do ourselves. So there are definitely financial limitations that we can get around by prostituting ourselves. And then there are some issues in terms of being a small but ambitious company where you are not grown enough to actually do the full LCA. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I see you nodding, Lili.
Yeah, I experience kind of the same. I think there is like some good, I think it is becoming more streamlined, and I think there are a lot of companies that are seeing this potential, that a lot of companies, suddenly with greenwashing legislation, they need, LCAs, they need numbers on their products. So there are definitely some good solutions that are coming, but it's also, are they verified enough? Like, for example, we use something called CIF, Climate Impact Forecast, where it's kind of more like a comparative LCA. So we've been working.
It's exactly the same we're doing.
Okay, you also do CIF.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've been doing that ourselves internally, but we can't really communicate it because we could, but it's like that feels very risky because it's not been third-party verified. So I think that's always the big thing, is like third-party verified by someone that is not ourselves, and of course that makes sense. But that's just
so it's not the same we're using, but it's the same kind
method,
of issue that. You can. It has to be comparative. Yeah. So it is not specifically on yours, because ours is actually third part. We can communicate, but only a certain amount of that information that we actually got, which is not the whole picture.
It limits.
We kind of got a paper saying this is what we can kind of communicate.
Yeah, it kind of like you kind of feel a little bit restrained when you communicate. You're like, we are this, but not really. But
it is
it's
very
not
tricky.
Easy, but.
And the second question there was about who are you targeting with your product? And I guess this question goes first of all to Lili and Katrine and Maria. Tell us about your customers. Is it broad? Is it narrow? Are they?
Yeah.
Is it elitist?
I think ours has always from the beginning we always try to be very broad. Because I think where we make the biggest difference is where we get the people who wouldn't consider buying sustainable sneakers at all. If they buy our sneakers, then we really made the biggest difference compared to someone who already has cork sneakers. If you then buy our sneakers, the comparative difference is not that big. So we really try to get everyone, but of course there's the low-hanging fruits, which is like the people who already care about sustainability and circularity when it comes to fashion. So we kind of have to be a little bit thinking about the cost, so therefore we go after the low-hanging fruits, but we try to be as broad as possible.
Katrine, I see your outfit says "Make the Ocean Matter" on it, so
it's a sample. It's a sample. I'm recycling. Yeah.
But that's already targeting a particular type of customer.
Exactly.
Right?
But ideally, we would be for everyone. And one thing that makes me super happy is that I see that our kind of age group is very wide. Like I had both a mom and a daughter buying kind of almost the same swimwear in the shop today. So we are trying to be broad, but again, back to the price point. So we can't, unless we want to pay workers less or we want to compromise on transparency or whatever, this is the price point. And the price point will definitely be more high-end. So that's why we need Lili for president. So we can put a carbon tax on it so we can be more equal.
Maria, I guess you don't have that same price issue.
No, not at all. Actually, but kind of like the same as Lili said, that we, from the beginning, we were like, yes, there are people out there doing, a lot of secondhand shopping. And what we actually wanted to do was to target the ones who are these fast fashion shoppers and trying to convert them. So that's kind of our target group, but mainly young people. I would say we're going for the Gen Z, But also Gen Y, it's somewhere between that, so I would say 16 to 35.
I guess you could actually save a lot of money by...
What?
You could actually save a lot of money by sharing clothes,
Yes,
right?
yes, because like our mantra is to use clothing as currency, to see the value in the clothing that we already have and use that for swapping fashion with other people. So that's why we're a very good solution for students, of course, who have limited budgets, but yeah, and also mainly women, because women are the biggest issue within this area, I would say. Yeah, we have also spoken to a lot of men, and yeah, but their wardrobes are way more simple than female wardrobes are. So, but they also love our solutions. So some men have actually indicated interest in swapping fashion. So yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made that point and not me. Thank you very much. We're going to invite you all to take part in some group discussions with the panelists who we've met here for a few minutes now. But before we do that, I'd just like to say thank you to our 5 fantastic panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.